Hey everybody, this is Jason from Fuzzlord Effects, and you are listening to the Fuzz Life podcast show. On this episode, we're going to be answering a bunch of questions compiled from listeners just like you. All these questions came from YouTube and Instagram and different DMs and places like that. So we're going to just answer as many as possible in this episode. I thank you for watching and appreciate your time, and be sure you subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss out on any new episodes. And if you want to keep up with me on a daily, be sure you head on over to Instagram to the @Fuzzlord Effects page to see what I'm up to, or head on over to the fuzzlordeffects.com website. So let's get to answering these questions. So the first question comes from Instagram from Digger666. And the question is, do I ever consider the different sounds of humbuckers versus P90 pickups when developing Fuzzlord pedals? I don't so much consider them while I'm designing the pedals, but I'll tell you this. Every time that we test new pedals or listen to them, like during the prototyping stages and stuff, I do have one guitar that has like normal stock Gibson humbuckers in it. I have another guitar that has like a DiMarzio Super Distortion type pickup. And then that guitar also has a P90 in the bridge. So I'll get to listen to the pedals with a P90, a Super Distortion type pickup, another guitar that has standard humbuckers in it, and I even have a Les Paul that has a Duncan Invader pickup in it. So it does give me a lot to compare things to. Of course, P90 pickups are a little noisier. Super Distortion pickups are very clear and usually have a little less low end. And basically just get to play all these different pickups and compare the sounds, and I can always adjust the pedal accordingly. Here's another Instagram question from American Badass 13, and the question was, what was my first guitar setup? So when I was 13, I believe maybe 12, I got my first guitar setup. My dad set me up with a Fender Frontman 25R practice amp and a Washburn Flying V. These were both pawn shop scores, so 12-year-old me was shredding it on the Fender Frontman, playing riffs from Kill 'Em All, Metallica. That was like my favorite band at the time. I'm very curious to know, with all of you, wherever you're watching from, what was your first guitar setup? Leave a comment below. I'd like to know what y'all started on. This is another question from Instagram, catching the theme here. So if you haven't yet, you might want to follow the @Fuzzlord Effects Instagram page, because it's the easiest way that I can kind of keep in contact with everybody. So the question was, can I elaborate on germanium versus silicon fuzz differences? There's a lot of mojo floating around online out there about germanium fuzz pedals. So germanium and silicon fuzz pedals, let me just kind of give my overall thoughts on the two different things. The first thing I will say is that both work very well for fuzz pedals, and the design process behind them is just a little bit different. Silicon fuzz pedals, silicon transistors, usually have a much higher gain. Silicon transistors, due to the process that they are made, have a higher gain. So from an engineering aspect, on paper, silicon transistors were designed better and they work more efficiently, and we can get higher gains out of them, which are usually really desirable in audio circuits. However, some things like fuzz face pedals want a very specific gain range and ratio between the two transistors. I believe on a fuzz face, people usually want between 70 and 90 on the first transistor, and then like 120, 130 on the second one. Those are just kind of numbers to base by. Most silicon transistors are going to be in the gain ranges of like 2 to 300. So the differences with the germanium fuzz pedal using germanium transistors is germanium transistors usually have a much lower gain. That's just because of the way they were produced. One more thing I will add in on the germanium versus silicon transistor talk is that usually silicon transistors are going to have a little bit more high end, and people kind of hear a splatty kind of sound associated with them. It's kind of a negative aspect of it that has to get designed out in the circuit design process. The reason this is because a germanium fuzz pedal. We're going to talk about the 3 pins on a germanium transistor. So the 3 pins on a germanium transistor, what we get on a transistor, no matter if they're germanium or silicon, is we have something called a Miller capacitance, which is the intrinsic capacitance between the base and the collector and the base and the emitter on any transistor. Basically just means that transistors themselves are going to have an intrinsic capacitance which filters the audio slightly. On a germanium transistor, they have a much higher Miller capacitance, meaning they're going to cut off a little more of the high end just out of the box. On a silicon transistor, they've been made more efficiently and they have a much lower Miller capacitance. So a lot of times designers, to get around this, will actually put capacitors in conjunction with the transistors to increase what would essentially be the Miller capacitance of the transistor. Alex wanted to know what are some of my hobbies that are outside of music, which I had to think about a little bit at first. A couple of them would be, I like getting tattoos at a local tattoo shop here in town called The Parlor. I go see my friend Gabby down there, and that is one thing I like to do probably once a month or so. Another thing I really enjoy that is a big hobby to me is reading and getting books. So in the last Q&A video, I believe we talked about The Alchemist. So if you haven't heard of The Alchemist, I think that's a book you maybe should check out. Really good book. Short read, very fun. But today's book that we'll talk about is Conference of the Birds. A very cool book. I'm not very far into it yet, but I'll tell you the reason I got into this book was because the band Ohm has an album called The Conference of the Birds, which is based loosely off this book. So if you like Ohm and you like reading, then this book is for you. This is a question from Pedal TV channel, one of my favorite Instagram pages. They share amps and pedals and guitars and music from all over the world. So at Pedal TV channel on Instagram, check them out. I believe they're doing a giveaway right now on a Sleep cassette tape. So there may be time to enter still. But their question was, what is my favorite solid state transistor amp? 2 come to mind for me, and they're both actually the same company and basic model of amp. I would say the Crush 120 by Orange, I think, is the best bang for your buck. It's like $350, $400 for a 100-watt solid-state amplifier that has a reverb. I personally had one, and it was totally a good amp, took pedals well, nice and loud, and I played in a band setting with it. But I will say, favorite guitar amp overall that's a solid-state amp that I think would be really useful for most people is the Crush 20 by Orange. It has a headphone jack and it has a line out. That way you can use it to record pedals or like lessons and stuff right into your DAW. So you asked me the question, and now I want to ask someone else the question. Eric, what is your favorite solid state transistor amp right now?
Definitely the Boss Katana.
Boss Katana, why? Why is that?
It just sounds fantastic.
And it has, I believe the Boss Katana has a bunch of different onboard effects on it. I believe there's a guy on YouTube called, a guy on Instagram called Trailer Park Guitarist, does like cool stoner rock kind of riffs and stuff. And he's been playing a Katana with some Fuzzlord pedals that sound really good together. And I believe also it's got a headphone jack and a line out, correct?
Yes, it does.
So those are a couple cool solid state transistor amps that, like, the Katana and the Crush 20 would be really good for playing at home or in your bedroom. You can put headphones on. You can also record right into a DAW. And then the Crush 120, I think, is a really good modern solid state amp that you could go like gig with and play in a doom band. The reason, I'm already reading your mind. People are typing, what about the PV such and so? And what about the Sun Beta Lead and all these kind of things? Those are all great amps, but here is why I picked the Crush 120 over those. The Crush 120 was designed to work with 8 and 16 ohm cabinets. These older solid state amps were usually meant for a 4 ohm speaker cab. So you run into the classic thing where when you put a 16 ohm cab hooking up to an amp that was meant to run a 4 ohm cab, you lose a whole bunch of your power. So the Crush 120 was the one chosen because it is meant to work with the 4x12 cabs that most of us use, because the good folks at Orange know that we like 4x12 speaker cabs that are either 8 or 16 ohms, so they designed an amp just for us, and I really appreciate them doing that. Next question is, what is one of my favorite guitar speakers? This is actually one that was covered in the last Q&A video, so you can check that out. We're gonna leave a link. But just to answer it quickly, Weber makes my favorite guitar speakers. In the last video, I talk about which model and give a little background story. So this is another Instagram question from Patrick. And the question is, what is the best guitar setup for doom metal? A couple things come to mind. I'm thinking a guitar with humbuckers. SGs and Les Pauls are very popular. If I was recommending the perfect guitar for someone, it would probably be something with a 25.5-inch scale for the lower tunings, if you're into lower tunings. Gibsons, of course, use a 24.75-inch scale, which makes the lower tunings a little bit trickier. But of course, you can check out the guitar setup video we did a couple videos back on the channel, where we talked about some good setup tips, and we used a 24.75-inch Gibson scale guitar and then tuned it to C standard, and we give some tips about how you can do the same thing. So to continue with the overall gear setup, because I think that was the real question, I'm thinking a guitar with humbuckers, because fuzz pedals and distortions and stuff can definitely add some noise. So a humbucker guitar like a SG or Les Paul is a good start. Something like a big muff pedal, I think, is going to be a great baseline tone for most people. And as far as an amp, I think a JCM 800 would work good, or like a Plexi, or the amp that I think often gets overlooked is the Fender Bassman. So I got two questions about my Greco SG guitar. One person asked, where did I get it from? And another person asked, what do I think of them? I got the guitar in trade from someone on Instagram. I believe I traded a couple pedals and a little bit of cash for it. And as far as what I think of it, I think they make wonderful guitars. Grecos were made in Japan. That is a 1985 Greco guitar, so it was of course handmade. And I think it is a very high quality guitar. I think for the price that you can get them for, they're a very high quality, well-made guitar. I also recommend with some of these older guitars that they're probably gonna have a little bit of wear and tear on them. So I do recommend that you either set them up yourself if you're comfortable with that. Again, you can check out the video we did about that, or you can take them down to your local guitar shop. Even though we did a whole video with that guitar about setup procedure, I did take it down recently to my local guitar shop called Stallman Guitars, and I had the luthiers that worked there professionally set up my guitar. They polished the frets, they leveled all of the frets, and I believe they set it up to an optimal 0.008 of an inch neck relief. So the guys down at Stallman Guitars really did a great job, and I have been really happy with what they did. So just to let you know, a trip down to your local guitar shop may take a guitar that plays a little off and make it feel like a brand new guitar for you again. Here's a question from Rob in Ohio, and the question is, what's my favorite op-amp based overdrive or distortion? I'm gonna refrain from saying the Fuzzlord Effects Skymaster, and we're gonna do a non-Fuzzlord pedal. I think one of the best distortion pedals that uses an op-amp ever made was the Boss DS1 in the orange box. I believe you can get them for 40 bucks at Guitar Center. They're a great pedal, and they've been on a whole bunch of famous records. Just like JHS pedal says, if it sounds good, it is good. So the next question is, what is my favorite all-time non-Fuzzlord guitar pedal? And I just had to look around the room. I was looking at the shelf to figure out where it was, and it's the only guitar pedal that remains on my pedal board all the time without changing out, and that is the Boss RE20 Space Echo. I got into this pedal because Wada from Boris uses this pedal. David Majuri from the Slowmatics also uses it, and it's just a really cool echo unit that has reverb and delay, and it has the spaceship mode gas pedal thing that I never used. But if I ever want to make spaceship sounds, I can, and so can you. So this one's from Spread Eagle Beagle, again on Instagram, on the @Fuzzlord Effects Instagram page. And the question is, what are my thoughts on aluminum neck and bodied guitars? My first thought is I would love to try one out and like review it for the channel and talk about it more. So if someone wants to let me borrow one, or birthday's coming up soon, I would like to check it out. I've heard a lot of like mixed reviews on them. I've heard really good things and I've heard some not so great things. I've heard that sometimes they have some tuning issues when they come in and out of the case because the temperature change, because metal will change a little bit depending on the temperature. I think something really interesting about them is that they don't have truss rods. So usually on a wooden neck guitar, we have truss rods so we can adjust the neck relief, because imagine the guitar strings are like a jump rope. In the middle, they swing around, like they oscillate a little bit. So that's what neck relief is all about. But I think they look absolutely amazing and really cool. And I think that if a certain guitar, whether it be because of how it looks or it sounds, speaks to you and makes you want to play it, then that's a good thing. I see aluminum neck guitars and I think they look cool and different, and it inspires me to want to play that instrument. So this question is from Park Pedals, and the question is my thoughts on through-hole versus SMD components on a PCB. Eric Filming just said that he is really curious to know what I have to say about it, and I'm kind of curious to know what's going to pop out, because this is really just off the top of my head. For those of you who don't know, there's kind of two generic types of components out there that go on PCBs. Traditionally, in the past, we've always had through-hole components. So imagine a resistor with two legs, and it goes through the holes on the PCB. Then we solder it on the backside. SMD stands for Surface Mount Device. You can take all the same parts and then make them to where they're like very tiny, like the size of like a grain of rice, and they'll mount to the top of a circuit board. I think that there's really no difference in the sound that you can get from either type of component. Really what is different is the manufacturing process and how those would physically get soldered to a board. It's a lot easier for something called a pick and place machine it's a robot that picks up parts and places them on a circuit board. The cool deal about SMD components is that you can automate the manufacturing process a lot easier. So you can use a pick and place machine, or like basically one robot would squeegee solder paste over the board, and then a pick and place machine would place the components, and then you would use a oven called a reflow oven that would heat up the board, and it would flow all of our solder connections. You can also do an automated process with through-hole components, but you would be using a wave soldering technique. The final thing I'll say about through-hole versus SMD, about which is better or which is more reliable, NASA spaceships have SMD components in them. I believe there's probably some through-hole also. So if it's good enough for the space industry to launch astronauts into space, I think it's good enough for our audio circuits. This was a question that came from the Instagram channel while we were doing a live feed during the setup process for this video. If you were in that live feed, go ahead and give me a comment below and let me know that you were hanging out. I appreciate your time. The question was, what is something that makes me happy? So aside from getting tattoos and going to coffee shops and reading books and playing music, something that does really make me happy is seeing everyone interact in the comments on these videos and talk to each other and help answer each other's questions, hearing about where you're from. And I always love seeing photos of people, their gear setups with Fuzzlord pedals, or even seeing video demos and seeing each and every one of you having fun with your Fuzzlord pedals. So we're going to do 3 more questions. This one is, what is a good signal chain order for fuzz or distortions, and then reverbs and delays? The most common answer you're going to hear is that dirt pedals should go up front, like first, and then anything time-based afterwards. So that's just something I want you all to keep in mind. Dirt pedals first, anything time-based after. Now that doesn't mean you can switch them around. Topher, one of the folks that helps do some soldering here, he really likes running things in the opposite order and just coming up with really cool sounds. So there's no set rules. We get to swap them out. And the cool thing about pedals is it's just really easy to change the order of them. So leave me a comment below, because I think knowing how you all set up your pedal boards helps me know what you're doing, and it also helps other people and inspires them of how they should set up their boards. So leave a comment below and let us all know what guitar pedals you're using on your pedal board and the order that they're in. I'm really excited to see what you all have to say. Next question, noise and fuzz pedals, and maybe how to deal with that. So the first thing that comes into mind would be, if you're not using humbucker pickups, I think that's something that would really help you. The second thing that comes into mind would possibly be a noise gate pedal after your dirt pedals. And here's my third and final answer. You're going to have some noise associated with using high gain fuzz and distortion pedals, and that's just kind of part of the game. Fuzz pedals and how we learned how to love noise is kind of part of the answer. Now, of course, there is a certain threshold of what is too much. Some pedals that I played are just so noisy that I won't use them on my pedal board. But here at Fuzzlord, I really do put a lot of effort into the circuit design to try to design pedals that are not overly noisy. Last thing I'll throw in on that is that using an isolated power supply will help. What happens sometimes is that one pedal that's high gain can kind of introduce and inject some noise into other pedals through the power supply. What's an isolated power supply? Well, I can tell you what an isolated power supply isn't. If you just daisy chain a bunch of pedals together, just imagine that we're running all the pedals off of the same 9-volt tap, like a battery. An isolated power supply, like a truly isolated power supply, will have a different transformer for every different output. And what the transformer does is it makes it so that each power line from these different pedals is truly isolated to each pedal. So imagine if you had a couple pedals all wired up. A non-isolated power supply would be like running all 4 pedals, for example, with one battery hooked to all of them. An isolated power supply analogy would be the same 4 pedals with one 9-volt battery to each one, so that the power supplies are completely separate. This is the last question of the video, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come and watch these videos on the Fuzzlord Effects YouTube channel. If you haven't yet, be sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the weekly videos that come out. The question is, how do you get started building guitar pedals? Here's the simple answer. If you want to get started doing anything in life, the answer is just start. It is as simple as that. I think you could get a guitar pedal kit and you could start assembling the pedal and following some instructions. Now, of course, that doesn't teach you everything there is to know about guitar pedals, but we're talking about such a broad topic that it's impossible to learn everything all at once. Guitar pedals are kind of a multifaceted industry, so the actual physical assembly of the pedals is one skill. Another skill would be understanding how to repair things, so learning how they work. There's a lot of good websites out there, like Electro Smash is a good one that gives some breakdowns on pedals. I believe there's also Coda Effects has some good write-ups about different famous pedals. So if you want to start doing something, just start doing it. Start building some kits, start wiring some pedals, and then get online and just start reading and checking out tutorials on YouTube. So thank you for listening to the Fuzz Live podcast show. Again, my name is Jason Johnson from Fuzzlord Effects, and be sure you subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss out on any new episodes. As always, you can keep up with what I'm doing on a daily over at Fuzzlord on the @Fuzzlord Effects Instagram page, or you can head on over to fuzzlordeffects.com. We're also on Facebook and just recently started a TikTok page. So again, I thank you for listening, and I will talk to you next week.